Good afternoon. My name is Felipe Baliero, Director of Mobility and Energy Research with IHS Market, based right here in Houston. Thank you for joining us today as we continue with Houston Climate Week following a Hurricane Laura-induced postponement. Today, we will be discussing the Texas tough challenge of bringing electric trucks and vehicles to our truck-loving state. To begin, what is Houston Climate Week? Well, it's the official kickoff for the implementation phase of the Houston Climate Action Plan, which was released just this past April. The Houston Climate Action Plan is a science-based, community-driven strategy for Houston to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, meet the Paris Agreement goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, and lead a global energy transition. As a global city that attracts talent from all corners of the world, Houston acknowledges that climate change is a global challenge that must be addressed. The Climate Action Plan is organized into 4 focus areas, one of which is transportation. The reason that transportation is one of the 4 focus areas is that it accounts for 47% of Houston's total greenhouse gas emissions. For this focus area, there are 3 established goals. 1, shift our region's vehicle fleet to electric and low emission vehicles. 2, reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. And 3, provide equitable and safe mobility choices. Our focus today is on the first of these 3 goals, electrifying our region's vehicle fleet. By the end of the session, you will have a better understanding of how the City of Houston plans on electrifying its municipal fleet, how we can electrify vehicles within Houston that are personally owned, and by default, the rest of Texas, the challenges that we expect to face through this electrification effort, and also how we can get through these challenges via private and public partnerships on our way to a carbon neutral status. To help me address these items, I'm joined today by 4 incredibly important people that are key to our city's climate action plan. Marshall Kane is the Deputy Assistant for the City of Houston's Fleet Management Division. John Paul J.P. Urban is the Director of Public Utility Commission, or the PUC, for the state of Texas. Rohan Patel is the Senior Director of Public Policy and Business Development with Tesla. And Ryan Martin is Managing Partner for Evolve Houston. Welcome you all, and thank you for participating in this very informative and hopefully fun panel. Marshall, to begin our dialogue, since you are in charge of overseeing the city's fleet of vehicles, can you share with us what the city's timeline is for its fleet electrification efforts? What vehicles will be electrified first and to what extent? And also what the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we can expect to see from the electrification of these vehicles are? You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
There you go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for having me on the panel. I'm happy to talk about our timelines and where we're going. And I'll start a little bit about where we've been. So the City of Houston has had electric vehicles in its fleet since circa 2014, 2015 timeframe. But the way we rolled them out was a bit different. Instead of assigning those vehicles to departments, we put them in a keyless motor pool that's shared across citywide called Fleet Share, which basically allows employees to rent them out kind of enterprise rental car style for an hour, 30 minutes, a couple hours a day to do city business. And over the course of having electric vehicles in the program, it was a really great way to expose our employees to using electric vehicles. They've begun to ask questions, and we've even had some departments volunteer to say, hey, when you roll out electric vehicles to be assigned to city departments, we'd like to be first, or we'd like to be a pilot department. So we're ramping up to electrify our fleet from where we've already begun with the existing electric vehicles that we have. Last year, we wrapped up a consultant study that was a partnership with the Kinder Institute and Rice University. They looked at our fleet. They looked at the city's unique financial constraints. They looked at our city policy regarding leasing. They kind of took a very specific view with all of the nuance of the city of Houston to kind of tell us where we should start and what we should be ramping up towards when technology comes more available. So we're going to start the electrification of the fleet on the light duty level around sedans, small passenger vans, and possibly trucks. We'll see what happens in the truck space for vehicle electrification. with our current fleet and the vehicles that we do use, you may see some medium duty electric vehicles and even some heavy duty electric vehicles rolled out for some of the corporate fleets. But we don't have those specific types of vehicles that have been adopted into models such as UPS, Amazon. But what we are doing is we're trying to develop a plan so that when the medium duty and heavy duty vehicles that we do currently use come more available and hit a certain price point, that we will have a plan fleshed out, ready to go and rolled out. As it stands now, we've been working with our group Evolve, which is a public-private partnership, and we look forward to fleshing out a survey that we'll be sitting with each of our department vehicle coordinators to understand their vehicle usage, what's on their fiscal year 21 and 22 capital purchasing, and see where we might be able to switch over some of our traditionally fueled vehicles to hybrid or electric or hybrid electric.
Great, great.
I also wanted to, since it's Climate Action Week,
Sure.
I also want to point out, while we're not ready for medium duty and heavy duty to switch over to electric, what we are doing is trying to swap as many diesel powered vehicles as we can over to biodiesel. So we're still reducing emissions while we're waiting for technology to come available on the electrification side.
So renewable fuels in the meantime as a bridge. Great, great, great. And so segueing then into Evolve, which you just introduced, Ryan, if you could first unmute yourself, can you please describe for us what Evolve's mission is?
Thanks, Felipe. Evolve's mission is essentially to, work across the Houston landscape to basically guide the, not only on the one hand the flow of the evolution of the EV industry for the positive benefit of being a good steward of that from a private market standpoint, under the premise that electrification has positive implications for climate change. And so the mission of Evolve Houston is to focus on improving climate, improving air quality, and climate stability as it relates to the greater Houston region. And the way that we do that is by a focus on the electrification industry, both in terms of education, policy, commercialization, infrastructure, and grants and research.
Great, great. And in reading through some of what Evolve is working towards, I came across something that was very interesting, and that was the 30 by 30 goal. Can you explain to us exactly what that is, what all it entails?
Yeah, and so it's the 30 by 30 goal is that by the year 2030, 30% of annual new passenger car sales will be electric vehicles. We specifically chose that number because, not only is we conducted a benchmarking analysis of, what other regions in California and the Northeast, in the Midwest, and also across the South of the US and also internationally, what were the climate-oriented objectives of those regions as it related to electrification. Then we looked at it broadly from a national perspective and also from the reality of the Houston market as of what it is. And so, with that broader understanding and tailoring it specifically to Houston, I think at the time that we made that goal, the adoption rate was less than 1%. And Evolve Houston was started in 2019, and we basically said, it is ambitious enough to be a target and practical enough to be implementable for us to focus on getting to 30% over the next 11 years. And it has a nice ring to it as well. But the fundamental thing is, these things, you put markers on the wall and you work very hard towards them, and we're very confident in those goals. But since it has started, the stakes have been raised. The city of Houston itself has come out with additional goals that are even more enhanced to where we were last year. And that's also happening nationally. So there is a trend where, that goal can be reassessed. But for now, we feel very confident with those trends, even with COVID notwithstanding.
Thank you, thank you. And continuing then with this electrification picture, Rohan, as a representative of someone that is heavily involved in the automotive manufacturing industry, I think you'll see some value to this. So last year, Texas registered about 1.54 million new vehicles throughout the entire state, and that makes up approximately a tenth of all new vehicle registrations for the United States. Of these, 73% were trucks and SUVs, but just 1% of all of those were actually electric vehicles. Can you describe what Tesla has been doing to meet market demand and how Texans rank among other states in terms of electric vehicle penetration?
Well, number one, I'd say Tesla just and first of all, thank you, Felipe, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I thought Marcel and Ryan's comments were excellent. Looking forward to JP's. I will say just I didn't expect Ryan to give me the 30% by 2030. I'm going to challenge you, Ryan, and I feel like 30%. That is a bare minimum. We ought to be at 100% by 2030, and that's not just because of manufacturing we're doing. It's because, if you look, Felipe, at the fundamentals, first principles, it's kind of how Tesla looks at every problem. Is the car that we have today, is it better performing? Yes, by almost every measure, it has better performance, faster than any other production car that's ever been built. Is it better from a safety perspective for your family? Yes, that's also true. And independent arms, governmental arms saying the same thing. And that's fundamental. It's not just our EV. When you have a battery that's giving you a low center of gravity, nothing in the front that's coming at you in a head-on collision, you have the fundamentals to create a better safety experience. And that's not just for Tesla vehicles, as I said. Is it more fun to drive? If you've ever driven a Tesla and then sit in another car, it's hard to make the assessment that it's less fun. So on all of the things, I hadn't even talked about the climate attributes, which is the whole point of this panel, or the environmental attributes, or the socialized costs, or the healthcare benefits, or any other benefit associated with that. I'm talking about, do you like driving fast, fun cars? And I think the people of Texas do. Now, in terms of trucks and SUVs, you're exactly right. That's not just in Texas, by the way. That's in my home state of Indiana. That's in plenty of states across the country. So this is not a Texas-specific thing. People like trucks and SUVs, and a growing number of people across the world, not just in the United States. So both in terms of the Model Y, which we'll put out numbers here soon, the interest and the demand is off the charts, and that's our crossover Model Y. We just came out with it. We do we do zero marketing or advertising, and the interest of that vehicle is off the charts. We haven't begun building the Cybertruck yet. Don't even have a building to build it in, manufacture it in, but we are doing so in Texas. In Travis County. Couldn't be more excited about it. The reception we've gotten is off the charts as well. And I think that just in terms of the interest and number of reservations we have on that vehicle in the state of Texas, it's not a number I can put out there because frankly, we're a publicly traded company, and that number would get some attention. But the point being, there are a huge number of Texans that and people from all over the country that are interested in buying that truck. Hopefully, we'll see many others come into the picture. And we've seen some of those announcements. I'm frankly looking forward to many other companies electrifying their fleets, and we'll see more customer participation. But Ryan, man, I got to get better than that 30%.
Well, and I have a question, because our mission is fundamentally about climate first. But one of the reasons that we're very bullish is because of some of the stuff you hit on. There's the early adopter approach of people who like electric cars because they're electric, or people who are climate oriented and like them for those reasons. But there's also just the fundamentals that, one of the things that Tesla has been able to do, almost from a leadership perspective, if not from a definitive leadership perspective, is basically craft the electric vehicle to be, comparatively better in some minds from a apples to apples comparison. So if it's not about climate, if it's not about anything else, if it's about the fundamentals on why people purchase cars, performance, durability, maintenance costs, cool tech, comfort, there's a leadership point there. And so we're bullish on the hockey stick going upward, but then the fundamental question is cost parity. So I would ask you, what's your perspective? Clearly the Cybertruck is a lowered price point to some of the competitor pickup trucks, but what's kind of a broader market perspective on the cost of electric vehicles? Because that's been a big inhibitor. And if you look at average income in an area like Houston, I know there's a lot of money spent on cars in Houston relative to income, but electric vehicles are still across the board a bit above that range. But we're bullish on the trend coming down, but I think that is a big gating question.
That is the question. That's kind of our entire mission right now, on every aspect, both the efficiency of the powertrain, the range of the vehicles, driving costs down from production, from the virgin mining of the minerals to the actual manufacturing costs. Part of the reason why we located in Texas is because of the immense talent that exists there. But also there's fundamental costs that are advantageous in Texas. So we are very bullish on bringing those costs down. We're going to have more announcements specific to that on September 22nd, our battery day. But there are some significant efficiencies that we can get and stepwise improvements in the technology that will bring those costs down. I think you're going to see that play out. I mean, already people talk about costs. I think it's important to just note, Brian, that right now our starting price for the Model 3 is $35,000, which is less than the average cost of a vehicle in the United States. So today you can buy a Model 3 that is less than the average price that people pay in the United States for a vehicle. So we're going to see those costs keep coming down. It's kind of the motivating factor for all of us, because if we really want to do something about this climate problem and sustainability problem, we have to do that more and more and more. The other thing that will bring the cost down is the recyclability of the lithium-ion battery itself. So we will not, as we get more fleet turnover and vehicles coming back around, that recyclability is pretty impressive. And we're only going to get better and better at that as the years go by. Already, we recycle our lithium-ion batteries, and it's not that efficient. We're making improvements, as are others. As we see that, the costs come down even more, because we're not going to places, whether it's Australia or Canada or even here in the United States, to process and mine for those raw materials. So that's another component to the cost reductions.
Thanks, Rohan, and thanks, Ryan. To put that into perspective, right, the average transaction price for a new vehicle last year in the US was $37,500. So there are plenty of options in the market even today that are well below that average transaction price. Now, JP, turning to you, I see you as the gatekeeper to all of this, right? When people think about purchasing an electric vehicle, a lot of the people that have never driven or have never owned or experienced in any way, shape, or form what an electric vehicle is, are certainly, and I think justifiably, concerned about the infrastructure that's necessary to refuel that vehicle, right? And so you, as kind of an overseer in the Public Utility Commission, do you think that the infrastructure today is ready for the growth that we're projecting of electric vehicles?
I think the answer to that question is a solid I don't know. But first, I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you to my fellow panelists. This has already been a very interesting conversation. We started in January of 2019. We opened a project here at the PUC, 49125, and that is to review issues related to electric vehicles. So that's one question we actually asked ourselves. Texas is the Texas electric grid, particularly the ERCOT grid, is as diverse as as Texas is, right? In the Houston area, you have CenterPoint Energy, which is a very tight, dense electric grid, and as you go further and further west, they become more sparse and more open. And so the questions, that we were asking ourselves is that is there in our market structure, which is so different than anywhere else in the world, is there going to be infrastructure in place that if everybody goes home at 5 o'clock after work in Houston, plugs in their car, turns on their AC because it's probably 102 degrees, right, and cranks it down to 74 or 72, can the grid handle that demand? And so we're looking into that. I mean, at the end, and we're working closely with the utilities to try and understand that. I mean, a goal of 30% by 2030 seems ambitious, but if the good thing about that is that we're pretty nimble, and if we need to, I think we would be able to have the mechanisms in place to meet that goal, or to assist that utility to meet that goal. So yeah, the answer is we're looking into it, unfortunately. But we opened the project a lot because we kept having more and more people come in and meet with us who weren't talking about, me, the individual retailer, going out and buying cars. We were talking to big corporations who were talking about changing fleets over. And we were talking to big cities who were talking about changing their bus fleets over and their public transportation fleets. And so it definitely caught our eye. And we opened that project in order to get out ahead of that question and try and figure it out. So yeah, I don't have a definitive answer, but I think the good thing is that ERCOT and the PUC will be there to meet that, to step up when needed. Absolutely.
Great to hear.
Okay. Felipe, can I just jump in real quick? So
Absolutely.
First of all, appreciate that the PUC has taken on a leadership capacity on this question. It's great to see that. One thing I'd say, just to his point, which is exactly right on, that last part, Marcel, folks like Marcel who are working on fleets, big corporate users, and on the heavy duty side, we have a lot of infrastructure questions to tackle. And that, I think, is where policymakers and, frankly, I tell everybody that I talk to that's in graduate school or in getting their undergrad and interested in this kind of stuff, is learn about public utility commissions, because that's where the action is. You may not think that, but JP's job is so unbelievably critical to meeting some of these goals that Houston's put out there. And
I don't think anybody's ever said that the PUC is exciting. That's a new one. Yeah. But I'm welcome. I'll just go ahead and put this out there. We do have an HR website for all the smart people who want to apply for jobs here.
You should. It's because there's fundamentally, I think, Felipe, your question is exactly right. Fundamentally, that's where the action is going to be. So the question, though, on the light duty side, yes, there are transformer upgrades. There's lots of good policy that has to be done. But I work at Tesla. I have a Model 3. We do not have a level 2 charging station in our garage. Now, maybe I should, but we don't even have a level 2 charging station in our garage because we can literally plug it into the regular wall socket and we get more than enough vehicle miles out of that. I mean, we're basically at full charge anytime we need it. And my wife drives 40 miles to work. So I think the core question is really for the fleets and for the heavy duty side. And there's a lot of partnerships that need to be had, both in terms of the plug type, which we're doing, and in terms of the kind of business models that need to be put in place for that to be successful. So maybe I would say on the infrastructure, is there really a need for infrastructure upgrades? Of course, especially on the medium duty, heavy duty side. And for those people that live in multifamily dwellings, we've got to focus on those components versus worrying about, in Texas, a lot of people have access to plugs that would have no problem buying an electric vehicle. And they may have a theory in their mind that they have this problem or charging problem that doesn't really exist. It's really the folks that have some issue with multifamily units or are like Marcel looking at fleets.
Do you know, Rohan, approximately how much, or what the split is rather, between how often charging is done at home versus at a public charging station?
Yeah. So our fleet, I don't know if it's Texas specific, we can look into that. It's probably even higher in Texas, but it's somewhere in the high 80s, low 90s. And so it's extremely high. It's only getting higher. Every year it goes up because more people that realize, and we kind of skewed that ourselves initially in order to get people excited about electric vehicles. We said, you got free charging for life. So people, even if it costs them a couple bucks to charge at home, fully charged, they were still going to the supercharger for no reason. So that's not happening anymore. Less and less people are doing that. They're charging at home. And we're only going to see that number increase. You charge where you park rather than going to a gas station type of model, which doesn't really make much sense.
Right. So
well, how do you balance? Or Felipe, is it fine to ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Rohan, how do you balance factors of necessity versus kind of American car culture. And so there's an element of freedom to the driving experience, at least in America. And so the idea that you can get in your car and drive to the outskirts of the city or to the next city over at a drop of a hat is something that is, I think, very fundamental to a lot of what you see in cars, whether you have long range or, you know, high speed. There's a lot that goes on in the auto design of a car that's arguably unnecessary, but for some reason those things are driving factors in purchasing decisions. So how do you guys think about, you know, the re-education of, you know, what is necessary from an automotive standpoint versus, you know, maybe what is culturally prioritized?
That's a great question, Ryan.
I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think what you just said about what the U.S. culture is, not just in the U.S., frankly, but I think we should, frankly, all automakers ought to say, well, that's our culture. That's what we actually demand, and produce a product that fits that demand rather than saying we need to re-educate the culture around some new concept. So we could have designed and built a smaller battery pack, lower range, smart, but we knew that people have this desire to be able to go see grandma, to go to the national park that they want to go on vacation, whatever the hell they want to do. And frankly, some people just have long commutes. So even if you're not going to use the car for that 350-mile range that you've got in your Model S, or your 315-mile range that you got in your Model 3, it doesn't matter. You have to know that you've got it. And so I think that's going to be fundamental to the future, which is we've got to drive costs down, but give people that same level of freedom and easy access to charging that's very, very quick.
I'll chime in with a comment. I know that from the municipal standpoint, when we first introduced the electric vehicles to Houston, it was very early. I think we were one of the first municipalities to report electric vehicles in their fleet. And one of the issues that we did have was range anxiety. So when we have it, you know, in this fleet share, this motor pool, where it's most people's first time even interacting with an electric vehicle, circa 2014, 15 at the city, you know, it's like, okay, I'm getting in the vehicle, I'm in Houston, so I need to turn the air down, as was mentioned, and then you look at your dashboard and you watch your mileage drop instantly by 10 or 15 miles just because you've turned on, you know, an accessory. And so that kind of sparked the whole, how do we create an infrastructure where people can stop and be able to charge where they park? Where are our hubs? Where are our city centers? For private use and for municipal use, we have a lot of inspectors or people whose whole job revolves around them driving to multiple areas in the city. And so I'm grateful that over the course of my time here in the department, I've seen range anxiety quelled by OEMs with, you know, new models. You know, they have range boosters on an old model till they come out with their next, you know, here's Model 2 of our Bolt or our Leaf or whatever it is. And so that's becoming lesser and less of a problem. We just debuted a bunch of Bolts in our fleet, and we can't keep them on the charger because people who were, oh, you know, the older cars, the older model cars, you know, we wonder if we're going to run out of electricity while we're performing our city business and have to get a tow and a ride back, versus, wow, you know, this thing can go up to 200 miles. I don't see my my radio and my air accessories dropping my mileage left when I turn it on. But we still are trying to figure out a way to build an infrastructure that makes sense. Do we charge at the, you know, the place where the car is being stored, whatever city building or facility that is? You know, do we set up, we currently have an RFP out now for charging infrastructure. You know, do we find common areas or areas that are within a certain radius of where we do our work, and we set stations there that can be used for both public and internal to the city use? Because there are people who may, you know, I may not be going outside of the jurisdiction, but I cover a lot of mileage, or I have to do our arson group in Houston Fire Department. You know, they've expressed interest in wanting to have electric vehicles, but they do sometimes have to do cross-jurisdictional evidence drops or et cetera. So I may have to drive to Pasadena County. Can I make it there and back? And how many times can I go in a day? So those are some of the questions we have on the municipal side for our light duty anyway, with regards to, you know, infrastructure versus OEMs giving us more range. You know, where do we meet in the middle of, we have vehicles that give us a proper range on a full charge to where we may not have to charge every day. And for, you know, if we're driving down to Austin to go to the Capitol for whatever reason, you know, we've encouraged our government affairs teams to start taking hybrids, but if we want to truly lead by example, how can we get an electric vehicle to at least get us to Austin? And do we have the infrastructure built across these major thoroughfares that are highly traveled to where we can begin to see people using electric vehicles to travel in and out of town?
Thanks, Marshall. Pivoting a little bit here, then back to you, JP. The existing transaction structure that consumers are used to whenever it comes to recharging their electric vehicles is such that they pay on a per time unit basis. So if I plug in for 30 minutes, I pay a fee for the 30 minutes that I plugged in for, rather than how much electricity I consumed. Can you help us understand why that exists today?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I believe it's like that because of the retail electric market and the way it's structured here in Texas. And that if you were to bill on a per kilowatt, on a per kilowatt basis, that then you would have to. The question would then be, and it's something that we're looking into, would you have to register as a retail electric provider? So I think that's the question. And of course, along with that comes our customer protection rules. Whenever the retail market was set up, after the passage of Senate Bill 7 about 19 years ago, I don't think any of this type of stuff was comprehended, right, at the time. And so that's a good question. That's actually one of the questions we're working on right now for our reports to the legislature. The legislature comes in January, and that's one of the questions that we're presenting to them is that what do you think this should look like? And then they hopefully will give us an answer and come back to us, and we will craft rules to what they think it is. I personally don't think that those type of things were comprehended, and so we do have to be in this situation, kind of examine it and possibly pass some new rules to allow for those different types of transactions.
Good. And Rohan, following up on that, do you see that, because I know some states do already have this payment structure where consumers are paying on a per kilowatt hour basis. Does Tesla, since you own and operate and maintain your own system of charging infrastructure, do you see state by state differences in states where you pay on a per time basis versus a per kilowatt hour basis in regards to the actual utilization of the chargers? Are there key differences that you see between those states?
Yeah, there are. Well, not so much on the utilization, but on the fairness. But the way that I think about it is that charging providers, whether it's ourselves or anybody else, maybe even the city, whoever's operating the charging, is just like any other utility customer. I mean, if you're a laundromat using electricity, how's that any different than a charging provider? You're still a commercial customer, just like anybody else. So there's 35 states now have enabled charging operators to be able to charge on a kilowatt hour basis. I hope that's going to be the case in Texas. And the reason why I say fairness is if you have a car that charges faster, is more efficient, and within our own fleet, there are differences between how fast or slow a car is charging. And so if you have a per minute basis that you're charging, the entities that have the faster charging are sort of get an advantage versus the ones that have the slower, the cars that are faster versus slower. So, sorry, I'm not being very succinct or smart on this question, but I think you understand the point, which is in essence, you should get what you pay for, which is you should be able to pay for whatever amount of energy you actually receive from the charging operator.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. And so I've got a number of things that I want to cover still, but I see a great number of questions that are coming in here. So I'd like to start picking through some of them. Ryan, I think this would be best answered by you, since you do interact significantly with both industry as well as the city and other government entities. With Houston being a very energy dense city, meaning there are a lot of oil and gas employees and companies in the city, do you expect to see any sort of backlash from people within the industry as we're pushing for an increase in electrification of the light vehicle fleet?
Yeah, I think it's about perspective. at a certain point in time, Houston was predominantly an oil and gas city. That there's been evolutions there. At a point in time, energy was, on certain facets that were more limited to the options available now. Things have expanded to renewables, natural gas, hydrogen. There's a plethora of examples of the evolution of the innovation of what is energy as it relates to Houston. And so the perspective is that, Houston is and always will be, the energy capital of the world. And so what we're really talking about is an expansion of what is energy and the energy capital, and to add additional things, not necessarily to displace or to, replace or reinvent. And so this is really just an evolution in the arc of the city and this market. Now, granted, of course, there's certain overlap that does cause displacement. But from the perspective that we take, we are here to basically, guide from an education perspective, the private market activity that is organically happening. And so if EVs are continuing to be competitive with ICEs and consumer sentiment is driving that direction, and that has positive implications for the environment, we're supportive of that. But, it is, to be clear, it's in response to an organic commercial market action.
Thank you, Ryan. And the next question, I think would be best answered by both Rohan and JP, and it's around the grid stress that you alluded to earlier, JP, of everyone plugging in their vehicles at the same time in the middle of the summer when you're turning on appliances and the AC, and then you're also plugging in your vehicle. JP, for you, is the Public Utility Commission doing anything to start to inform or educate the client or customers? And then Rohan, for you after, is Tesla doing anything to educate its customer base on the importance of when you actually plug into the grid?
Right. So there's you're already starting to kind of see the creation of retail products that are geared towards owners of electric vehicles on the retail side. So, we are watching it and we're observing it, but yeah, but the market is already solving that problem now, and I think you're seeing a few plans now. I think as more and more people buy more and more EVs, and you see that increase, you're going to see more and more products catered to that class of customer. I don't know much about the actual technology that charges, probably a Rohan question answer, and I'm pretty sure that you can set the timer like you can on your washing machine or your dishwasher to start like at 11 o'clock at night, and charge it. I mean, these vehicles seem pretty smart, and they're usually driven by pretty smart people who are going to be in the market and going to study it and know what product best fits them to charge their home. Okay, I'll give it to Rohan.
Rohan?
Yes, so exactly right, JP. And I think so in a Tesla, and this is true in a few other cars as well, just from our app on your phone, you can tell the car when to charge or when not to charge. You can set it in your car console if you'd like that. So in states that have time of use rates or billed based on peak or off peak, you can decide when to do that. So if you're a grid operator, there's obviously arbitrage opportunities there as well in terms of market participation. So, I think Texas has a perfect opportunity given the free market way that the energy system has been set up. It's really a fantastic opportunity to allow for any number of different assets to participate. And I think we'll see that going forward. And that's going to be both good for the efficiency of the system and good for customers. It's potentially another way to access a market and maybe even get paid for it.
And that free market approach is so important because it is both what makes Texas, and particularly Houston, a very special place where the EV industry can be driven very aggressively for the benefit of climate stability. But there's 10 trucks coming onto market in the next few years. Obviously, Tesla has done a lot to lead from a charging infrastructure standpoint. But there's a lot more work to be done, not only within the way in which Tesla approaches this, but also in the way in which other OEMs do that as well. That's part of our mission at Evolve Houston. We have worked with the city to release an RFI to study this more deeply as it relates to the city fleet and the public charging station infrastructure in the region. And we also are conducting fleet studies with different large fleet owners to understand how some of that range and charging anxiety can be encapsulated into a manner that is both equitable for the ultimate constituents of this stuff, but also pragmatic from a business perspective. And so it really begs the question, what is the role in a free market of regulators to support the market as it expands, and also and kind of work in tandem with the private market. And, maybe that raises certain questions for JP, but that's really what we focus on in Evolve and filling that gap. There's 10 trucks coming to the market, all very promising. Prices are reducing. We're very excited, but there's more work to be done, and that's where we focus.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that in situations like we're seeing right now, I think a heavy-handed regulator is a bad idea. I think you let the market fill those holes and you let that develop, and you fill in the gaps where need be as a regulator. But for the most part, you let the market do the work and you let that work itself out.
It's interesting. We work with NRG, Shell,
Sure.
To the point earlier about the oil and gas perspective. NRG, Shell, Centerpoint, on the academic side, University of Houston, of course, City of Houston. These are companies in those industries that are looking toward expansion, looking for aggressive action, looking to the future. And so to JP, we look forward to continue to work with you from a standpoint of educational information from our perspective, what we learned here in Houston, and agree, private market first is very Houston oriented. And Texas.
Well, and JP couldn't agree more with what you and Ryan just said. It's especially important in the electric truck space. That collaboration with policymakers and utilities is going to be incredibly important, but the over-engineering that we've seen in other jurisdictions in other countries in terms of the user experience via very restrictive regulations or overly ambitious regulations that get, frankly, more expensive for all of us. So that's, I think your point there at the end, JP, was dead on. And Ryan, I think the kind of the ethos of Texas in that way is I think going to be quite advantageous here.
Yeah, thank you guys. This question here, another really interesting question, both for you, Marshall and Rohan. You two now have experience with understanding how electric vehicles age since you have them in your fleets. And we've got someone here that has a question with regards to what can we expect in terms of long-term maintenance for electric vehicles? Is it going to be less, more? Can you speak to that at all compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle's maintenance?
So I'll speak from the municipal standpoint. So here in the fleet department, not only do we provide vehicles and help with the procurement for them for other departments, but we also do maintenance. And so we've just gotten to the point where we have salvaged our first batch of Nissan Leafs is what we started out with. And honestly, even with the first version of the Leaf, which is what we had, maintenance is very few. I don't think we ever had a brake change. Outside of tires and fluids, there wasn't much. I think we may have had to change out a water pump or something on a rare occasion, but the Kinder Institute study that we've published on our website speaks specifically about the cost of maintenance savings, total cost of ownership, including maintenance versus some of the traditional fuel vehicles that we have here. And so I look forward to us ramping up and bringing more electric vehicles on, because maintenance is very, very minimal. And that's where you get your cost savings really on the back end. Even as the sticker price goes down, you really get your cost by the reduction in what you're paying for maintenance on the vehicle.
Rohan?
I don't think there's much to add. She Marshall knows what she's talking about. So, but I guess the only maybe additional thing is one of the reasons people ask why are you guys doing your own service? Why do you do your own sales and delivery? On the service side, it's a kind of a principle that we have, which is if we screwed up the car somehow, we ought to pay for it. And so we make no money, zero profit on our service. So when you bring your car in, there's no incentive to, sell you on some, fancy filter or whatever else thing that, might some kind of tire treatment or any other thing, because the whole point is just to get the car back in as good a shape as you possibly can. So part of the reason why we can do that is because there are very limited moving parts. There's no spark plugs and a lot less fluid issues. So yeah, I think we're going to see that as an advantage. It's hard to talk about total cost of ownership, frankly, because people look at the sticker price. So we got to bring that sticker price down further and further and further. For geeks like me and maybe others on this panel, total cost of ownership is an easy thing to talk about and get into the specifics of maintenance and insurance and everything else. But truth is, the most light duty vehicle owners in the United States, at least, just don't look at that.
Right.
Well, I will add, because this came up at the NAFA and the GFX, the fleet conferences that we have every year. So there at one point was a big consensus about first generation electric vehicles and their batteries' ability to continue to hold a charge. So a 100% charge might have started out at 150 miles, but 5 years in, 100% charge will only give you 70 or 90. And I can attest, in speaking with OEMs, talking about it at the different conferences, now that we've rolled out second gen EVs into our fleet, we are no longer experiencing those issues. Both the range of the battery has both increased, and we don't have I forget, there's a term for
degradation.
When you charge your Apple phone, after a couple of years, right, your battery says 100% and maybe a couple hours you're at 50. So that at one point was happening, and I know that had been a discussion in some of our electrification coalition calls. That issue seems to be taken care of across the board with all OEMs in terms of battery technology. So just wanted to add that tidbit.
For your end-of-life vehicles, Marshall, the first generation Nissan Leafs, and this is also one of the questions that was asked here by one of the audience members. How did you go about scrapping that vehicle? Were any considerations taken to the recycling of the battery, or were special precautions taken to make sure that it didn't become a hazardous waste?
So when we were ready to salvage our first Leaf, it wasn't getting the mileage to the charge that we needed, and so it was not being used. It was neglected in our reservation motor pool because people weren't confident that they could make it where they needed to go and back. We'd also had it for a while, so we said, hey, you know what? Nissan's doing at the time they had a program about battery buybacks, and so you could get a new battery at a discount. So we weighed the cost of, how old is the car? How many miles are on this vehicle? Does it make sense to, get a discounted new battery to put into the vehicle, or should we go ahead and salvage it? And so when we salvage vehicles, we take them to auction. And so the vehicles were purchased by someone else. So whether that person is restoring the vehicle or if they decided to strip it down to parts, I'm not sure if what action they took after they purchased it. But we didn't have any, I guess, authority with regards to what happened to the battery after it's purchased. So I know a couple of people went down to the city auction, purchased them, and then they call us back asking, hey, how do I do XYZ with the car? Or, can the driver's manual wasn't in here, I can't download one, I have a couple questions. So I know some people did restore them or probably took advantage of that program and got a new battery put into it. But we haven't scrapped one for parts to the point where we would have to figure out what to do with the battery. But that is something that our city council has raised with regards to electric vehicles. Just what is the process in general, and where do we come into a point of authority to make a decision about what happens with it? And more often than not, with the few vehicles that we've salvaged, they've been purchased by someone else. So it's it's at the behest of the purchaser to do something with the battery. But we're still keeping an eye out on what Rohan was talking about before with the recycling of the batteries and how that's coming along, and just so we can stay informed, and if we get to that point, that we can make sure that we're disposing of them responsibly.
Thank you, Michelle. So unfortunately, we are running out of time, but not questions. There are a number of other questions that we might not, I don't think we're going to be able to get to, unfortunately. But one last one that I think is incredibly important. Houston is prone to natural disasters, hurricanes, flooding. What are we doing, and this can be to any of the panelists, to make sure that our evacuation paths are supplied with sufficient charging infrastructure so that if we have to evacuate and there is a significant volume of electric vehicles in the city's or region's fleet, that we don't run out of fuel halfway on our journey to Dallas or Austin, San Antonio, or if you're driving east and being brave towards Louisiana, since they also experience similar natural disasters at the same time that we do. How are we addressing that, right? I think that, I mean, even for our household where we have an electric vehicle, we still keep a conventional vehicle for fear of the unknown. You can't prepare for a blackout event always, right? And then if you have to evacuate, how do we do so safely so that we don't get stranded halfway on our journey and create a backlog or a traffic jam that then prevents other people from evacuating?
So let me, I want to take this one real quick because it's, and others may have a different perspective. There's, Felipe, this is sort of like this question around fires. Oh my God, the electric vehicle, there's some fire somewhere in Mongolia. We got to be worried about it for the entire world. When in the reality is your internal combustion engine vehicles have been catching on fire for years and years and years at a much higher rate, and yet people don't seem to be driving around worried that their car might catch on fire. It's the same question here, which is, if we are in a natural disaster type of situation, like we had in Puerto Rico, for example, with literally 7, 8, 10 miles long lines to get to that gas station because they couldn't fill up. And we've seen those kinds of lines here in the United States as well during disaster situations. You have the very same issue that comes up. So I'm not sure that yes, maybe there is a worry, but it kind of goes to Marcel's point, to range anxiety. Once you actually own an electric vehicle and you realize every single morning you've got a full quote unquote tank and it's going just as far as your ICE engine vehicle, there's nothing to worry about. And the other thing I'd say is I can't share my screen here, but if I could, I would, and just show you where all of our charging stations are currently, how many we've got, how many plugs we've got, how fast it takes. And it doesn't belittle your point, because your point is exactly right. We need more. But it does kind of go to the point that, generally speaking, most electric vehicle owners have a full tank every single morning. That's not the case for most internal combustion engine vehicle owners. They go fill up once a week or so. So if there's a natural disaster that hits, you're charging up in your home, and you've got a full tank when you're leaving. Whereas that owner of the internal combustion engine vehicle, who knows? Maybe they charged up last week and they're down to a gallon left. So I think we need to look at this question a little bit differently.
But specifically from a Houston local standpoint, it's quite the opposite, and that kind of local nuance is really the role of Evolve Houston, especially from, you look at it from purely an ESG standpoint. How do we educate and kind of guide the flow of this market into the Houston region? So a couple of facts that won't be lost on anyone in the audience. Houston is prone to hurricanes on an annual basis. That's a Gulf Coast issue. And when it comes to evacuations, in an ICV vehicle, you fill up the night before and you drive as far as you can, and then you fill up again and continue on your journey if you haven't arrived. But it still begs the question that if you fill up the EV before the evacuation, where is that point in which you stop and recharge? Tesla has a supercharger network that probably cannot handle mass charging. like a gas station line. There's no real portable charger like you would for a cell phone. And once you step outside the level 3 superchargers at Tesla, we still have an issue of equity for people who would not even have access to those superchargers if they're on an evacuation path. Hurricane Katrina, you evacuate 4 hours at least going west towards Houston. You got to go past Mississippi going east. These are long ways that are above and beyond the current range, other than, I guess, the most expensive Cybertruck. And it's the same with Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Harvey. I mean, it's a very real issue that the citizens and residents of Houston are constantly faced with. And so, we look at it from analyzing, these types of technologies from with the community in mind. These are very important questions that do not have sufficient answers. But we're working on it. And I do think, Rohan, to your point, I mean, there's issues with ICE vehicles too. I mean, frankly, there's complications in evacuating regardless of how you evacuate. So there's issues everywhere, but specifically here, I mean, that is an open question.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Well, so unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank everyone that participated in this panel. Thank you, JP, Ryan, Marshall, and Rohan. Really appreciate your time and willingness to spend an hour of your time here with us. And audience, also thank you for joining us, for sticking through this very interesting session. I hope that you now have a better understanding of how our city plans on electrifying its municipal fleet. Thank you, Marshall, for your insights. How we can work towards the electrification of personal vehicles, the challenges that await us, but also how we can get through them on our way to a carbon neutral status. Remember, we're all have a part to play here. And if you'd like to learn more about our climate action plan or sign up to be on a committee, since this is a partnership between all stakeholders, and we really do mean that, it's incumbent upon all of us as citizens of the region to participate in this. Please visit greenhoustontx.gov or search for Green Houston, Texas in your search engine of choice. We'd love to hear from you guys. Again, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to one of us via email or to our main organization, and we're always happy to field any questions offline. Thank you very much.